The title of my talk this afternoon is The Ancient Wisdom in Modern Fairy Tales. Now, the ancient wisdom has come to us from antiquity, from the dim past, where its origins are shrouded in the mists of primordial time. From the days of the earliest fully human beings on this planet, the wisdom has been transmitted to us by many channels. It's come through the work of the great teachers, the wise ones, such as Mahavira, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, Shankaracharya, the Christ. It's also come through secret or semi-secret movements, such as the Greek mysteries of Eleusis and of Orpheus, the early Christian Gnostics, the Jewish Kabbalists, the German Rosicrucians. And it has come also through humbler, more ordinary channels, one of which is the fairy tale. You know, today fairy tales are usually dismissed as things of no importance because the fairy tale has had a bad press. You know, think of how we generally use that term. If we say of something we hear, that's a fairy tale, we probably mean that it's a lie, a fiction, a fanciful explanation that no sensible person would take seriously. Indeed, we often say that's just or that's only a fairy tale. Now, just and only are words we use to dismiss something as of no consequence, something hardly worth noticing. However, fairy tales have been around for a very long time and are to be found all over the world. Some of the stories that 20th century children know were told in ancient Egypt. There are fairy tales from China and Japan, from India, from equatorial Africa, from the American Indians. And everywhere we find similar characters, themes, and often plots. Moreover, fairy tales are still being written. New stories using the old ingredients are among the best sellers of our time. Today we call them fantasies, but they are essentially like the traditional tales. So fairy tales are very old, are found all over the world, and are still being written. Anything which, with such antiquity, such ubiquity, and such modernity, has got to have some value. Things without value don't last. Now, some commentators have indeed recognized fairy tales as stories of considerable importance. R R Tolkien, a philologist and Oxford Don, and himself the author of some of the most popular of modern fairy tales, has said that fairy tales have four main uses, each of which has great value. He called those uses escape, consolation, recovery, and fantasy. And by each of those four terms, he meant something very specific and very important indeed. Another contemporary writer, a Freudian psychologist, Bruno Bettelheim, has written a book called The Uses of Enchantment, in which he argues that fairy tales are one of the ways children learn to cope with the confusing world about them and to respond successfully to the challenges they meet in their lives every day. However, long before Tolkien and Bettelheim and other such recent scholars who have defended the value of fairy tales, H.P. Blavatsky knew their importance. In her appreciation of fairy tales, as in much else, Blavatsky was well ahead of her time. That appreciation went back to her own childhood, when she loved to hear and to tell such stories. Blavatsky's sister, Vera, in her reminiscences, gives us a glimpse of the shared childhood fondness for fairy tales that she and Helen had. And she hints at what that fondness was later to mean for Helen Blavatsky. Vera wrote, "If Helen loved to tell us stories, she was still more passionately fond of listening to other people's fairy tales. There was, among the numerous servants of the Fadif family, an old woman, an under-nurse, who was famous for telling them. The catalogue of her tales was endless, and her memory retained every idea connected with superstition. During the long summer twilights on the grassy lawn under the fruit trees of the garden, or during the still longer winter evenings crowding around the flaming fire of our nursery room, we used to cling to the old woman and felt supremely happy whenever she could be prevailed upon to tell us some of those popular fairy tales for which our northern country is so famous. The adventures of Ivan Tsarevich, of Kashtai, the immortal, of the Gray Wolf, the wicked magician traveling through the air in a self-moving sieve, or those of Melatressa, the fair princess, shut up in a dungeon until the Tsarevich unlocks the prison door with a golden key and liberates her, delighted us all. Only while all we children forgot those tales as easily as we had learnt them, Helen never either forgot the stories or consented to recognize them as fictions. She, Vera goes on, she thoroughly took to heart all of the troubles of the heroes and maintained that all their most wonderful adventures were quite natural. People could change into animals and take whatever form they liked, if only they knew how. Men could fly, if they only wished so firmly. Such wise men had existed in all ages, and existed even in our own days, she assured us, making themselves known, of course, only to those who were worthy of knowing and seeing them, and who believed in instead of laughing at them. End of quotation. Now, Blavatsky's delight and confidence in the essential truth of fairy tales lasted into her maturity. Then, however, she came to see their importance in a richer light. In Isis Unveiled, Blavatsky wrote an insightful sentence about fairy tales, one sentence that sums up the importance of the genre. I'm going to say this sentence, and it's a typical sentence from Blavatsky, which is to say it's very complex. All right? So I'll read it, and then I'm going to tell you what I think it means. Here's the sentence. Fairy tales do not exclusively belong to nurseries. All mankind, except those few who in all ages have comprehended their hidden meaning and tried to open the eyes of the superstitious, have listened to such tales in one shape or the other, and, after transforming them into sacred symbols, called the product religion. This sentence identifies three levels of interpretation, three ways people have looked at fairy tales. The first is that of the nursery. This is the way we usually think of fairy tales, as pleasant little stories that are meant to amuse and entertain, as fictions for young children and others who are childlike in heart. Now, HPB doesn't deny that fairy tales are that. They are. Indeed, it's probably because such tales appeal to the childlike mind that they have survived over the centuries and the millennia. But fairy tales are not just that. They do not, says HPB, exclusively belong to nurseries, although they are certainly at home there. The second level of interpretation that HPB identifies is that of organized human institutions, especially formal religion. HPB says that we have taken the ancient tales and literalized them. We have transformed them from what they really are, making of them instead sacred symbols, the substance of our organized religion. We can look at the majority religion of the United States, Christianity, and see that HPB was right. The Judeo-Christian sacred writings are full of symbols or myths or fairy tales that many Christians have taken literally. The Garden of Eden and the fall, Noah and the ark, Moses crossing the Red Sea and wandering in the wilderness, the infant Christ and the wise men from the east, the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. All are magnificent fairy tales that have been literalized by believers. They are grand myths that we have transformed into sacred symbols and whose product we have called religion. Now, in calling the scriptural stories fairy tales, we do not minimize their importance and value. Fairy tales are about things of transcendent importance, and are themselves of invaluable worth. R R Tolkien, who was incidentally an Orthodox Roman Catholic and a devoted one, said that the gospel story is the greatest fairy story ever written. And in so saying, he certainly intended no disrespect or disbelief, but rather his own profound conviction of the reality and the worth of fairy tales. The great pity is that some modern Christians have lost sight of the real value of their own scriptures and think of them instead as something like news stories reported in the Chicago Tribune, historical facts without any vital inner meaning. But all fairy tales have a vital inner meaning, and that's what makes them of such value. Blavatsky called it their hidden meaning, which she said has been comprehended in all ages by a few who have tried to open the eyes of the superstitious to that real meaning and to the use of the fairy tale. Tolkien, whom I cite again because he is the best-known 20th century authority on the subject, he said that there is a widespread misunderstanding about what fairy tales are about. They are not, he said, about fairies, especially not about those diminutive, playful, pretty little human-shaped creatures that popular imagination has invented. Fairies of any kind appear only rarely in fairy tales. Rather, said Tolkien, fairy tales are about the realm of fairy, which he distinguished by an archaic spelling, F-A-E-R-I-E. The realm of fairy, said Tolkien, is an enchanted, perilous land where human heroes find themselves willy-nilly. It is the cosmos where evolution unfolds. It is the human soul where initiation takes place. Fairy tales are maps of the realm of fairy. They are guides to the great world, the macrocosm, and to the small human world, the microcosm. H.P. Blavatsky's secret doctrine has two parts, cosmogenesis and anthropogenesis, dealing with the universe and humanity, respectively. It is itself a gigantic fairy tale. In their essence, all fairy tales describe the human adventure, our pilgrimage through the cosmos, and our discovery of our own true natures. The plot of the fairy tale is our spiritual autobiography. As a character in J.B. Priestley's play, I Have Been Here Before, says, we each live a fairy tale created by ourselves. Hansel and Gretel, Cinderella, Jack the Giant Killer, Beauty and the Beast, all such traditional tales are maps of the realm of fairy. All are guides to our journey outward to the cosmos and inward to our own psyches. Not only traditional fairy tales, but modern ones as well, map our journey through the perilous land. And there are many modern fairy tales. For example, C.S. Lewis's Out of the Silent Planet trilogy, his Chronicles of Narnia, and his retelling of some traditional tales, such as Till We Have Faces, a new version of the Psyche and Eros myth. Ursula Le Guin's fantasies, especially her Earthsea trilogy. J. R. R. Tolkien's Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and even movies like Star Wars, all fall into the category of the fairy tale, and there are many others. To see that modern fairy tales are still being written, and that as maps of the perilous land, they continue to express the ancient wisdom, we can look at what is undoubtedly the best known and most loved of all modern fairy tales, and it is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, written by L. Frank Baum while he was living in Chicago. and first published in 1900. The story is, however, most widely known through the Judy Garland movie of 1939. There are few Americans who have not seen the movie at least once, and there are many who have seen it repeatedly. The Wizard of Oz has entered our national folklore. Almost every week, there are allusions to it in the popular press. Matter of fact, if you start looking, you'll be amazed at how many you can find. I've been collecting them over the past year and have a thick file of articles, clippings, cartoons, all of which allude to the Wizard of Oz. It is the American fairy tale par excellence, and that's exactly what Frank Baum set out to write. A story that would be a modern fairy tale for American children. He succeeded beyond anything he could have imagined. The plot of The Wizard, for anyone who has not seen it recently, is briefly this. Dorothy lives in Kansas on a farm with her Aunt Em and Uncle Henry. One day, a cyclone comes. While her aunt hurries to the cyclone cellar for protection, Dorothy looks for her little dog Toto, who's hidden under a bed. Consequently, Dorothy and Toto are picked up in the house by the cyclone and carried to another world, the land of Oz. There, the house is plopped down in the easternmost part of the land, right on top of the Wicked Witch of the East, thus killing her and freeing the Munchkin inhabitants of that land, whom she had enslaved. Dorothy, who is understandably upset by all these strange events, wants to go home to Kansas. She's advised to consult the wizard, who lives in the Emerald City in the center of the land of Oz. She's also advised to wear the silver shoes that belong to the Wicked Witch, because everybody knows their magic, though nobody knows just what they do. Incidentally, in the movie, the silver shoes were changed to ruby slippers. I expect perhaps because of the advantage of Technicolor in the movie. Dorothy and Toto set out following a yellow brick road that leads to the Emerald City. On the way, she meets three companions, each of whom joins her, in the hope that the Wizard of Oz will be able to give him what he lacks. The first is a Scarecrow, whose head is stuffed with straw, and who wants some brains so he can think. The second is a Tin Woodman, who was once an ordinary being of flesh in love with a beautiful Munchkin maiden. Unfortunately, however, he was under a spell cast by the Wicked Witch, so he kept chopping off parts of himself and being repaired by a tinsmith until he finally became the first fully bionic man with a completely mechanical body. In the process, he lost his heart, and thus he is no longer able to love the Munchkin maiden. Now he wants a heart so that he can love again. The third companion is a cowardly lion, who ought to be king of the forest, but who is afraid of everything. He wants courage and the will to act. After many adventures, Dorothy and her three companions reach the Emerald City, where they gain an audience with the wizard. The wizard says that he'll be happy to grant them their requests, provided they first do a little something to prove themselves worthy. They must go to the westernmost part of Oz and there kill the Wicked Witch of the West. Now, Dorothy and her companions are not very keen on doing that, but since there is no alternative, they set out for the western land. After many adventures, they succeed in their quest when Dorothy throws a bucket of water on the witch, which dissolves her. The witch is thus liquidated. Wicked witches, it seems, like naughty children, cannot stand water. When the four companions return to the Emerald City to claim their rewards from the wizard, he puts them off for a long while. Finally, the great and terrible Wizard of Oz confesses that he is really a humbug. He was a balloonist in Nebraska who worked for a circus, going up in his balloon to attract a crowd for the performances. One day, a strong wind blew him all the way to Oz and dropped him in the middle of the land. When he fell from the sky, the inhabitants thought he must be a very great wizard indeed. So they accepted him as their ruler, and he led them in building the Emerald City, where he could hide without his humbuggery being discovered by the witches of the land, of whom he was very much afraid. Now, although he is a humbug, the wizard says he will do what he can to keep his promises to the four companions. He fills the Scarecrow's head with a mixture of bran and needles, so that he will have brand new brains that are sharp as a pin. He puts inside the Tin Woodman's chest a heart made of stuffed silk, guaranteed never to break. And he gives the Cowardly Lion a little green bottle filled with courage, Dutch courage presumably, from which the lion drinks. To help Dorothy get home, the wizard builds a hot air balloon to try to sail with her back the way he came. But just as he and Dorothy are ready to cast off, Toto runs into the crowd and gets lost. As Dorothy hurries to find the dog, the ropes holding the balloon down break, and away it sails with the wizard, who cannot control it. Thus Dorothy is still stranded in Oz. The inhabitants of the Emerald City suggest that Dorothy should seek the aid of Glinda, the good witch of the South. So Dorothy and her companions set out on a third journey. After many more adventures, they reach the court of Glinda the Good, who tells Dorothy that she has had all along the power to go back to Kansas whenever she wanted to. The magic silver shoes she is wearing will carry her to any place in the world with 3 short steps. Dorothy need only say where she wants to go, click her heels thrice, and she will be there. Dorothy now bids goodbye to her friends, says she wants to go home to Kansas, and in 3 steps, there she is. And so the story ends. Now, The Wizard of Oz has all the essentials of a true fairy tale. It's set in a perilous, enchanted land where the human protagonist is engaged in a quest. The Wizard of Oz is also a remarkably theosophical fairy tale. It can indeed be read as a theosophical allegory. Consider first the 2 lands of Oz and Kansas. They are the setting of the story, and they provide its chief theme. Dorothy is questing in Oz with the aim of returning to Kansas. The 2 countries are obviously of cardinal importance to the story and its meaning. Kansas is depicted as a gray, colorless, flat, featureless landscape. And so it's sometimes thought to represent the ordinary, dull world of everyday reality. Oz, on the other hand, is vibrant with color and adventure and interesting people and things, so it's sometimes thought to represent the world of the imagination and of fantasy. But that interpretation just doesn't fit the overall plot of the story. Although Dorothy enjoys Oz, while sometimes being a little frightened by it, all she wants to do from the time she first arrives in Oz until the silver shoes carry her away is to get home to Kansas. Oz is a nice place to visit, but Dorothy wants to live in Kansas. There's no disputing tastes. In the story, Kansas, not Oz, is the desirable place to be. We can see 2 important things about the land of Oz if we look at a map of the country, such as one of those published by the International Wizard of Oz Club, Incorporated. That's an organization of people who like the Oz books and who share their enthusiasm with one another. One of the things we can notice about Oz is that it has a central green area, the Emerald City, surrounded by 4 regions, each with a different symbolic color, blue, yellow, red, and purple, and that it has the overall shape of a 4-sided figure. The land is bounded on all 4 sides by an impassable desert, a ring past knot that isolates Oz from all other lands. Now, these ingredients of the topography of Oz, the impassable barrier, the 4-sidedness, the symbolic colors, the circle, and the center, are also the ingredients of a mandala. Oz is a mandala. Mandalas represent, among other things, the human psyche and the world of samsara, the world of becoming in which we live. The manifold, beautiful, enticing, but also frightening and perilous world of differentiation and becoming. And that's what Oz is. Oz is samsara, the seductive world of earthly beauty, which draws the soul to it. You and I live in Oz. It is this world, this various dappled world, this magical world of pied beauty. Kansas, on the other hand, is the world from which we have come before finding ourselves in the perilous land of the separate self. Kansas is the world where there is no differentiation, but only oneness. No color, which is diversity, not even any black and white, which are opposites, but only the unity of gray. No various hills and valleys, but only the uniform smoothness of the Great Plains. Kansas is the comforting, reassuring world of oneness from which we all have come and to which we are destined to return. Kansas is nirvana. Like Dorothy, we have but one purpose in this world of Oz, this samsara of changing appearances, and that is to get home to Kansas, the nirvana of unchanging reality. If we look at the map of Oz again, we can discover a second important thing about it. The overall outline of the land of Oz is a rectangle. The land of Oz is the same shape as the state of Kansas. Oz is Kansas. The two places in the fairy tale are finally the same, just as nirvana and samsara are the same reality, only viewed differently. Dorothy can go home so easily with just 3 short steps because in reality she has nowhere to go. She is already home and needs only to realize that fact in order to make the homecoming real. Other aspects of the story are also symbolic. Dorothy's name, which is a variant of Dorothea and a reversal of Theodora, means gift of God. And that, as that name suggests, Dorothy is the soul sent from God out of the nirvana of Kansas into the samsara of Oz, here to find her way back again to the undifferentiated unity from which she comes. There waiting for her are Auntie Em and Uncle Henry, who represent the primordial feminine and masculine forces, which Blavatsky called Mula Prakriti and the unmanifested Logos. Baum's wife, incidentally, was named Maud, and his mother-in-law was named Matilda. The initial of their names is also the first letter of mother. Thus, M, the initial, and Auntie M's name suggest the archetypal feminine. By similar associations, Henry, which means ruler of the home, suggests the archetypal masculine. Dorothy is brought from Kansas to Oz by a cyclone. Now, a cyclone is a great circular wind, a gyre. The Greek word from which cyclone comes means a circle or the coil of a serpent. The cyclone is the cycle of birth and death, which catches us up and brings us into life, that is, to Oz. Dorothy is caught in the cyclone because she has been distracted by her little dog Toto. Toto expresses the archetype of the mischievous beast. That archetype represents the animal nature in all of us. And when we are led astray by it, when we follow it heedlessly, we are caught up by the passionate winds of the cycle of necessity and blown into the world of samsara. Toto is the little beast in each of us, our special pet whom we are loath to part from, and attachment to our mischievous animal nature brings us into birth. In Oz, Dorothy acquires 3 companions in order, and the order is important: the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, and the Cowardly Lion. These companions lack, and thus have the need to develop, respectively, intelligence, love, and courage, or the will to act. Dorothy's 3 companions are clearly thinking, feeling, and doing, the mental, emotional, and physical natures. And she acquires them in that order, from the highest to the lowest, just as we do when we come into incarnation. The Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman debate which is more important to have, brains or a heart. And their debate is reminiscent of that section in H.P. Blavatsky's Voice of the Silence called The Two Paths, in which the intellectual doctrine of the eye is compared with the compassionate doctrine of the heart. The Scarecrow and Tin Woodman's debate is left unresolved, with the implication that both are good, and that, as Dorothy decides, it doesn't matter so much which is more important if only one gets back to Kansas. Attaining the goal is all important. The means of doing so is not. Dorothy's quest in Oz is to find her way home, back to Kansas, Nirvana, but it has 3 phases. First, there is a journey from the east to the center of the land, where the Emerald City is located. Second, from the center to the west to slay the Wicked Witch, with a return journey again to the center. And third, from the center to the south to consult Glinda the Good, from whom Dorothy learns the way home. The route that Dorothy follows has thus the shape of a big T. Now, what do these 3 phases suggest? Well, in the first phase, Dorothy follows the yellow brick road to find the wonderful Wizard of Oz in the center of the country. The yellow brick road strongly suggests the path, the mystic way that leads to enlightenment. At the end of that path is the Emerald City and the wizard. Emerald, or green, is the color of harmony, of balance. It's midway in the color spectrum. It's the color of the 4th or harmonizing ray. The aim of following the path is to establish that harmony. The aim is also to find the teacher, the guru, who can show us the way home. The wizard represents, among other things, that teacher. In the second phase of the quest, Dorothy is sent into the west to slay consciously the Wicked Witch who rules there, just as she unconsciously slew the Wicked Witch of the East when she landed in Oz. Now, east and west are points of the compass with well-established symbolic meanings. East is the place of the sunrise. It betokens the beginning of things. It is birth. West is the place of the sunset. It betokens the end of things. It is death. In Irish myth and in many other mythologies all over the world, the land of the West is the country of the dead. The wicked witches of East and West represent, respectively, the desire for birth and the fear of death, which accompany our coming into and passing out of this life. Dorothy's quest is for salvation, liberation, enlightenment, freedom from birth and death. And during this mythic fairy tale, she is to achieve it. The story is, as it were, of her last incarnation. She is one of those who return no more. When she lands in Oz, she crushes the Wicked Witch of the East, thus overcoming the desire for further birth. That is an unconscious feat, because it's the result not of her actions in this life, which is just beginning, but rather is the fruit of her past accomplishments. That this is her last life is due to her karma from earlier, unremembered lives. The crushing of the Wicked Witch of the East is therefore unconscious on Dorothy's part. During the second phase of her quest, however, she must consciously meet and slay the other Wicked Witch, that of the West, who represents the fear of death. The gaining of nirvana and the transcendence of the personal self is a kind of death, the death of separateness. To achieve our quest, we must destroy the fear of death. We must slay the wicked witch of the West. And so Dorothy does. She liquidates the witch. She dissolves the fear of dissolution. She washes away the last stains of separateness. What shall we make, however, of Dorothy's return to the Emerald City after she has conquered her fear of death, when she discovers that the wizard, the teacher, the guru, is after all a humbug? That is perhaps the most theosophical detail in the entire story. The wizard is a humbug because all teachers we find outside ourselves are humbugs. One of the cardinal messages of theosophy is that we can rely on no one except ourselves. As the voice of the silence says, "Prepare thyself, for thou wilt have to travel on alone. The teacher can but point the way." Each student must walk the way alone. Reliance on a teacher, on a guru, must inevitably end in disappointment. All teachers are humbugs save one, the teacher within. So Dorothy sets out on the third phase of her quest. This time she travels to the land of the South to seek the counsel of Glinda the Good. To travel south is to travel deep within ourselves. Glinda represents the intuition within each of us, the only true source of guidance. What Glinda tells Dorothy is that she has always had the power to go back to Kansas. Dorothy needs no guru, for she is her own guide. She need only rely upon herself, upon her own feet, clad in the silver shoes that are her contact with the earth of Oz, which is also the earth of Kansas. For Oz is Kansas, samsara is nirvana. If there is a moral to the wonderful Wizard of Oz, this is it. We must rely on ourselves, for we have the power to save ourselves. That moral is made throughout the book, also with respect to Dorothy's three companions. The Scarecrow thinks he needs brains, but whenever the company finds itself at an impasse, in an impossible situation which they can't get out of, it's the Scarecrow who thinks of a solution to the problem. The Tin Woodman thinks he needs a heart, but he's the one who's constantly worried that he may step on a bug as he walks. Because if he steps on a bug, he is so emotional that he begins to cry, and his tears rust him. He is constantly feeling such compassion for others that he weeps freely. The Cowardly Lion thinks he needs courage, but he's the one who acts bravely to save the company whenever they are threatened by danger. Dorothy's companions, like Dorothy herself, have within them the qualities they seek. We each have everything we want. We need only the intuition of Glinda the Good to tell us so. Now, you may say that this interpretation of the Wizard of Oz is all very well, but you may wonder whether there is any reason to suppose that Frank Baum would have recognized this interpretation of the story. Is this theosophical interpretation itself a fantasy, just a fairy story, with no relationship to Baum's intentions in writing the story? Well, of course, we can never be sure of any author's intentions. In a sense, what an author intends is not the important thing about a work of literature. Authors often, in fact, usually, write more than they know. However, in the case of The Wizard of Oz, there is indeed reason to suppose that L. Frank Baum would have recognized such a theosophical interpretation of his story. Baum knew about theosophy and agreed with many of its basic teachings. In 1888, Baum moved to Aberdeen, South Dakota, where he edited a weekly newspaper, the Saturday Pioneer, in 1890 and 91, about 10 years before he wrote The Wizard of Oz. One of his biographers reports that Baum was well read in the occult sciences, that he became interested in theosophy while living in Aberdeen, and that he was rumored there to be a Buddhist. In the first issue of the newspaper which Baum edited, he wrote an article on theosophy. And in subsequent issues, he wrote other articles on elementals and other similar subjects. He believed in evolution through reincarnation, in karma, in the identity of God and nature. Baum was not the only member of his family to hold such ideas and to have such interests. His mother-in-law, Matilda, who lived with the Baums much of their married life, wrote to one of her grandchildren as follows: "There is one thing I want you to remember first of all. This is that what is called death by people is not death. You are more alive than ever you were after what is called death. Death is only a journey, like going to another country. You are alive when you travel to Aberdeen just as much as when you stay in Edgeley, North Dakota. And it's the same with what is called death. After people have been gone for a while, they come back and live in another body, in another family, and have another name." End quote. Baum may or may not have been aware of the extensive possibilities his book has for interpretation as a theosophical allegory, but he would certainly have regarded such an interpretation as appropriate. The Wizard of Oz came to Baum as a kind of inspiration. Baum was a remarkably motherly man. He looked after his children, all boys, in their sicknesses and in accidents. He comforted them in their sorrows. When the boys got a hurt of some kind, it was to Daddy that they ran in the Baum family. He told them bedtime stories. Baum's stories were so famous that neighborhood children would come to the Baum house every day to hear the evening tale. One evening, a story came to Baum that he recognized as having great potential. So after the children were put to bed, he jotted down the outline of the story on bits of scrap paper. The result is the essential outline of The Wizard of Oz. Baum's mother-in-law recognized the story's potential too, and it was she who urged him to write it out and have it published. In later years, when asked how he had written the book, Baum said, "It was pure inspiration. It came to me right out of the blue. I think that sometimes the great author has a message to get across, and he has to use the instrument at hand. I happened to be the medium, and I believe the magic key was given to me to open the doors to sympathy and understanding, joy, peace, and happiness." End quote. Baum certainly did not set out to write an allegory, but he was inspired to write a story that, like all good fairy tales, has depths of meaning of which the writer himself would have been only dimly aware. Baum's background and beliefs were such as to fit him for the writing of a fairy tale filled with the ancient wisdom, as is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. H.P. Blavatsky wrote that the ancient theosophists were called analogists because of their custom of interpreting all scriptures and sacred symbols as metaphors for an inner reality. It is precisely in this way that fairy tales, traditional ones and modern ones alike, are of value. Fairy tales are analogies of truth. When we have comprehended their hidden meaning, as HPB says, we have seen into ourselves and recognized our own powers and potentials. We have learnt that upon our feet are silver shoes that can carry us home whenever we will use them. For home is here. Kansas is Oz. Heaven is all about us, waiting only for us to recognize it. And that is the ancient wisdom in all fairy tales.